Tats, how are you doing?
Yeah, Serene, thank you for the invitation to come on the show.
Oh, I'm so excited you're here. You're a busy man. I booked you, I think, a couple months in advance. You have a very full schedule.
Well, I mean, obviously I try not to jam up the schedule too much, but it was nice to finally be able to do this.
What I think I liked most, I was talking to your, I don't know if I'm revealing too much information, but I was talking to your lovely personal assistant, and she said that we have different time zones, right? So I was asking to be at a specific time, and she said that you block out dinner time and afterwards for your family, and that like warmed my heart so much. I love to hear that.
Well, I mean, you have to try to create some boundaries, right? I think as an entrepreneur or even everyone's situation with the remoteness of work and stuff, I think it's hard to set, kind of those boundaries kind of compress, and it's hard for all of us. So any attempt to try to create some separation and quality of life is, I try.
Yeah. Would you like to give a quick introduction or a long introduction about
Okay, I'll give a quick introduction and you can sort of dig in as your curiosity is. So, but maybe I'll start with why I'm an entrepreneur. Like when I was a kid, I think my first memory, because I think when you look at what we are, or our careers when we grow up, sometimes there's clues when we are younger. And I distinctly remember when I was 10 years old, I had a friend that had a pear tree in his backyard. And, the pears were on the ground. And I thought, you know what? Wouldn't it be great if we took those pears and we sold them and we made money? So we're looking for a place to sell these pears. We found a convenience store that didn't have fruit that was near a bus stop. We set up this sort of makeshift table and started selling these pears. And, we weren't very successful. Two kids sitting there. Some people felt sorry for us, bought a little stuff, but, we weren't that successful. But just before we were going to give up, there was a guy and his girlfriend that came up to our table and said, I love entrepreneurs, and pulls a crisp $20 bill out of his wallet and gives it to us. And, this was a while ago, right? Because I'm older. It was so much money in the world. And to think that, he didn't buy pears. He just loved the idea of us going out there and trying stuff and trying to, make a name for ourselves or whatever we were trying to do. And I thought, hey, if you're willing to try something, you just never know what's going to happen. And to be able to sort of take an idea and turn it into something, I just sort of really felt the power in that. And it was just fascinating to me.
Wow. And as a kid too, I mean.
Well, I think there's all clues, because when I'm on my podcast, I always ask, people that are so in, like let's say they're so into sales or something, and you ask them about their childhood, they usually have a story like, Girl Guy cookies or something. So I think, not everyone kind of settles in on it, but the people that are happy, that are extremely passionate, there's some sort of congruence to, childhood temperament that exists, like, when they get older, that kind of fits together. And I think sort of leads to a path that is kind of rewarding and ultimately successful.
Wow. And it's interesting because so many people that I've talked to, when they find their thing, it's like sometimes the first instance of something, like it just clicks for you as well. Like you try something out for the first time and then you're like remarkably good at it. And then you think, oh, maybe this is the direction that I need to be going in.
Oh, I'm gonna ask you about your thing next, but it's funny because what I usually find is a lot of people don't think anything of it. They're like, anyone can do it. Anyone could come up with strategies, or anyone could sell it. Maybe sales is a little different because it's quantifiable, or maybe some people are very good at like being creative or something, but it comes so natural to them. Some people just discount it. Like people around them are screaming at them saying, you're so good at this. You should, take this and develop it or stuff like that. But to some, they'll go, it comes so easy, hence no value. And that frustrates me because I love people, to be able to understand that we all have these things that are, innately unique and, special in different ways. So how about you? Like where do you find your energy or your sort of, I don't know, people call it different things, zone of genius?
Yeah. I play music and I haven't released much. I think there's some sort of energetic block around releasing music for me, but I'm working on it. I am. So I play guitar. I play guitar like not my whole life, since I was 7, and I've been doing a lot of music production lately. So like electronic beat boops, and then like this podcast, talking to people. I did stand-up comedy for about 5 years, and I stopped, but that was a lot of fun. That was a fantastic adventure, and it was far more useful for me than university was. I did it at the same time as university. It was it was a lot of life lessons in stand-up comedy.
So I'm trying to learn about you. Would you say if you're doing stand-up, I don't think you're an introvert. Is that correct?
I am. Well, the only person I am is who I am in this moment, and I don't really feel like an introvert in this very moment. But I do have. Generally, I like to spend time alone and work on projects, and so for things like music, it works really well because I can just It's funny because I think people define introvert in different ways. And so you could define introvert, oftentimes it's defined as somebody who is anxious around people, which I'm generally not very anxious around people.
Yeah.
But oftentimes I will get my fill of people and then enjoy being alone after that and like working on my own thing. And for that reason, stand-up was it was fairly difficult because oftentimes you're in a room for like 4 hours, watching comedy and like being around all these people and like waiting for your turn. And so it's a lot of energy. It's a lot of emotional energy for sure.
Yeah. But that's why I was wondering, because I'm an introvert, and how I originally was just shy. And then as it developed, it's just an energy thing where I have to do energy management. So I look at my day and how it's structured and making sure that I don't overdose and on anything. And a story I'll tell you how shy I was is when I was in grade 8, I went to a school that required me to take either band or drama. Mm-hmm. And I hated the idea of drama, like doing things in front of people. It just felt so silly. So I ran as fast as I could to band. And, I showed up in band class, and in school, you go to learn things, right? But in band class, you don't learn. People there know what they're doing, right? So it's one of the weird classes in school, which you're actually not learning, you are learning, but enough to play in a band together. And I looked around and goes, oh, well, maybe I'm in trouble. So that was my first mistake. I couldn't read music. And I thought, well, maybe, my family's very musical. My mom, sister plays piano. My dad plays guitar. Maybe I'll be okay. And then I made the second mistake. And the second mistake was this. I chose the trumpet, thinking, how hard can an instrument with 3 keys be?
You can't even play all the notes. You're fine.
Not knowing that, the less keys, the more you have to do to create the notes. And so here I am, a complete distraction to the class. They had to shove me in the band equipment room by myself to practice. It was completely embarrassing. So I'm in there making horrible noises like hanging my head in shame. And I clued in for a second. I thought, well, maybe this, people forget about me and the semester will be over and I will never, ever speak of this again. And I distinctly remember just before the semester ended, the teacher walks and say, hey, in order to pass this class, you have to play with the band in front of the entire school. And my face went white. I don't think I felt my legs. And when the teacher walked out, I was looking for a friend just to say, what do I do? And he looks at me and he kind of gives me this sad look and say, pretend. And so the day of the concert comes, so I'm staring at the entire school. If I went into drama, it would have been 20 people, okay? But the entire school. And guess what? I wasn't even good enough to pretend like I knew what I was doing. So I stuck out and made a complete fool out of myself. And from that day on, I was like determined to not run away from that and try my best not to run away from anything that I'm uncomfortable with, and if there was a good reason for me to tackle it. So, for speaking, I did Toastmasters, I did, public speaking, I did like 40 speeches, I did, storytelling classes, I did stand up once, which was terrifying, but I put it on video. And so, because I say this, I learned this from a guest that I had on the podcast. There's 3 types of weaknesses. So there's weakness 1 where, for instance, like I am not a good cook. And luckily my wife doesn't care. And when I make efforts to say I want to do something about it, she wants no part of it. So there's a weakness I do not need to address.
Yeah.
Now, the second weakness is weaknesses that you need to mitigate. Like, for instance, if you want to be an entrepreneur, there's 3 main buckets that you have to kind of address. There's a demand bucket. There's operations bucket, which is, keeping people happy, keeping the teams happy. And there's a profitability bucket. So you need to understand finance. And I think what's not talked about a lot, or at least for me, is in order to be a decent entrepreneur or an operator of a business, you need to be at least average in all 3, preferably good in 1. If you're good in 2, then you're a very good operator. But I had to address, I was good on the demand side, but I was very poor at the operating and the financial side, and I really needed to shore that up. But I think what you want to look at is everyone has their own individual vision of what success is, right? It doesn't necessarily mean starting a company does not mean success, or growing a company does not mean, but everyone has their own vision of what success is. And hopefully it's not impeded by other people's points of view. And, to reach that, right, and, goal, you have to figure out, what you have, who you need to surround yourself with. And if you have any weaknesses, A, can you ignore them? B, do you need to mitigate them? Or C, do you need to become, this is the third one, world-class at it? And one of the examples I'll give, controversial, for instance, Elon Musk, is he was a very, strong introvert, but he wanted to change the world. And he worked very hard on adapting his communication style so that he was effective when going out there. He still has his quirky style, which it's unique to him, and that's very important. But he wasn't very good at talking in front of people. And when he wants to, raise money to put people on the Mars and all those things, you need to be very, very comfortable addressing large groups of people, and you have to be very persuasive in doing that. So if you have a goal like that in which you want to change the goal, communication most likely needs to be a strength. Even if it is the absolute weakest, if you have a goal that is that important, then you need to take that head on. So I think if you want to look at those weaknesses, you think that then it could kind of figure out where you have gaps. If you're, a gap between the success that you want and where you are now. But that's one of the ways I look at it.
It's fantastic. So we just hosted, actually, I should say, my partner did all of this organization, Elliot Redelman, but he just hosted a 5-day retreat that I attended, and actually 2 other retreats. And he flew this guy in, Jesse McKay, he was in Mexico at the time. He travels all over the world doing these retreats. And it's hard to exactly say what they are, but there's something like emotional training. And it was interesting because at the beginning, there was this girl there and she was saying, there's this board of like how safe you feel in this moment. And so like, it's just a way. A lot of what he was doing was getting us to constantly touch in with our emotions. Like one example would be like, how angry are you feeling right now? How sad are you feeling? How joyous? And like out of 100. And then like, how activated is your nervous system, on a scale from like, I'm about to fall asleep to like a tiger is chasing me, and so there was like a safety board and you would move your little card up and down. And she said, this one girl at the beginning said like, well, half the people here are feeling lower than average safe. And I want to get it up to higher than average safe. I think before we progress, everyone should be feeling completely safe. And Jesse said, well, he's also very good at taking criticism. He's astounding. But he said, there was a lot more said, but in essence, he said, in my opinion, I want half the people to feel unsafe and half the people to feel safe. And I want it to be kind of moving around, because at different points in time, we're going to have to confront our feeling of lack of safety, because in life, we have a feeling of a lack of safety. And if we're always feeling safe in this retreat, then we don't get to confront our feelings of not feeling of uncomfortability. And it made me really think about the value of recognizing and feeling discomfort in our lives. Then figuring out.
So for a while, exactly what you're talking about, I had this thing where, I'm trying to remember, I don't listen to actors very often, but there was a moving YouTube thing that I listened to, and it was something along the lines of like, run towards your fears, right? Like kind of, tackle your fears kind of thing. And I was doing that for a while, and it was effective in terms of getting through some of the areas that I wanted to become stronger in, because I have a bigger goal. But where I've sort of progressed to as I move along is that I could get the same result by exploring it in the name of personal growth. And there was less friction there. And as long as my exploration was somewhat directed, and I had enough people around me that were a complement, that in terms of sort of guideposts and stuff like that, that exploration would lead to so many discoveries, and I could achieve the same personal growth without feeling that gut knot in my stomach. So I have no idea if that I had to go through that first to get to where I feel effective this way, or I could have started this way. So it's really hard to tell, because I know sometimes once you've been at something so long, you start to talk like it's easy, right? Mm-hmm. And I'm like, well, how much of it is because you put in a ton of work, and how much of it and you sort of progress to this, and how much of this, if I told myself 10 years ago, I could have actually done. I always kind of weigh those two, because I know sometimes talking from where you spending a lot of time sometimes isn't very productive to someone that is maybe earlier on in their journey, and you have to kind of remember what you are experiencing at that time that help you move through those phases. So I have some awareness around that, and I'm really interested in that dynamic.
Well, there's it's interesting that you say that, because like what popped into my mind was Stephen King's book on writing. And one of the things he said, he works like 4 hours a day, deep work, no interruptions, no TV, nothing like that. And he just churns out these best-selling books. And I think at some point, this might be an appropriation of his words, but he said something like, I have to do this and just if you have to write every day, you should write. And if you don't feel that urge, you shouldn't do it. And it's funny because like there's this concept of maybe that's the advice he should have given to his younger self, but actually maybe there are some writers who are plagued by feelings of doubt or like some childhood minor trauma that made them feel like they don't want to write, when actually they deeply do, and they're just having a hard time parsing out, like, you know, the fact that their mom said they were a terrible writer when they were 5, and like, and the fact that they want this desire in this dream, and it kind of feels like what you said, like, you know, it feels so easy to you, and maybe, I don't know.
Yeah, the evolution, right? Like you can't neglect evolution just because it's working. If you took that exact process and time traveled, would it have made a huge difference, or maybe would it sabotage something, right? I'm always like, when people talk about like the past and, oh, you know, if this shouldn't have happened, but when you move one thing around, a whole bunch of other things change, right? So, I mean, I'm just so grateful of all the experiences that, you know, good and bad, that I have, because I mean, it's cool because you just can't just kind of detach one thing from another. So it's hard for me to believe that if I were to tell myself, you know, that question in podcasts, like, what would you tell yourself when you were younger? I think about that question, and I've, you know, guilty. I've asked that many times, but when I ask myself that question, given the day and what I'm going through, it kind of changes, right? So I'm thinking to myself, I mean, you know, how impactful could it have really been, right? You know, because it probably isn't one thing that was making the difference at that time. There's just so many things that are going on in your life when you're younger that it's just really hard to just take one thing and, you know, magic potion fix, right? I mean, we love that magic potion. That's why, you know, diets, you know, sell and stuff like that. But I think it's a lot more complex than that.
Yeah, of course. And not to mention that giving someone advice doesn't automatically mean they fully understand it and conceptualize it and now have a good systematic overview of why it's a good idea. Like maybe that thing you learned from making mistakes actually influenced your life in a really positive way. And if you had just been told not to do this thing, you wouldn't have learned quite in the way that you needed to. I'm just beginning the process of converting to Judaism, and there's this idea, and I'll just say the English words, like there's they have this word called a mitzvah, which is like a commandment from God. And there's this idea that if you sin in the past and then you end up turning your life around and start being a good person, then automatically all your sins from the past turn out to be good deeds because they got you to where you are. And
okay. I took a personal development course, and I feel so bad because I can't quite remember the name of the person. But the whole concept was around mapping out your major transitions in your life. So who you're around, you know, what did you do during this transformation? And there's like, I think 8 different criterias and stuff like that. So you map out, and most people have like 5 or 6 major transitions in life if you're a little bit older, right? If you're younger, maybe you have 3 or whatnot. And then you start to realize there's some trends, right? Like who is around, what type of people around, what approaches you take in and stuff. And then you see some areas that are not as consistent. Maybe the transitions didn't go well. Was it a forced transition? Was it a proactive transition? Who encouraged you? And then this course, what it does is tries to optimize against those things that are working and to fuel the next transition. And the idea around it is to go to your past and try to dig up things that you did well. And I think the point is, you know, we remember the bad things, but if you really come down to it, you probably did 90, 95, even 98% right, but you remember the 2, 5, 10% that went wrong. And to forgive yourself for the mistakes, and then appreciate the past versions of yourself before these transformations. So imagine like standing on top of the shoulders of your older versions of yourself. So fully appreciating the fashion you wore, or the things that you said, and the things that you made mistakes and learned from and stuff like that. So it was a kind of a cool concept. I think sometimes I do that thing where like, oh, I was this way and now I'm better, right? But their concept is, hey, you're always better. You just have to remember how you were better and build yourself up, that everything happened in the past and you can pull from it, right? You can like pull from your past and use that as a power. It's like, for instance, if I played tennis when I was younger. So, I mean, there's so many ways that that comes into my day-to-day conversations, and I can build relationships, or I can tell stories or something like that. So basically just taking the positivity out of your past, and then just really kind of accepting it and integrating into your future self. And it's a cool concept. I really liked it.
I am actually curious about, we have to, it's funny because I've like narrowed in on your personal life, and we've talked about emotions and finding your calling and things like that. But I'm actually pretty interested in your entrepreneurial history. Could you give us a little rundown on that?
Sure, absolutely. So, for a brief little time in school, I had this sort of tennis bug where I wanted to play professional tennis, but that came to an end, and I went back to my sort of entrepreneurial focus, and I was reading books and I was doing all those things, but I knew I needed help, right? And I guess maybe it's my sports background and stuff, where I'd always hire coaches or I had mentors. It was just a no-brainer for me to try to find a mentor. And I had a friend of mine that was worked at the same place, and he introduced me to a guy named Peter Rosen. So Peter, he's invented a bunch of things. So he invented the Windows media player. He sold to Bill Gates. He worked on some early 3D printing technology. He worked on a technology that later helped inspire the MRI. So total inventor. So I got introduced. I worked for him for free just to learn, because I was like, wow, I need to learn from him. And what happens is when you put yourself out there and work for someone for free. So here I am, I'm going to school, I'm working at a job, and at night I'm volunteering, learning, working on stuff, and eventually starting companies. And that's how I got started.
Wow. And could you tell us about the companies that you started?
Yeah, I mean, I think I just fell into a whole bunch. I think originally we started a series of marketing companies. One was a sports marketing company that kind of morphed more into a product marketing company. So we did a ton of front end product feasibility, studies, and also product launches. So I launched about 100 plus products. So a lot of it was consumer products, industrial, some technology. And when I first started doing that, I was really bad. I didn't understand it. It didn't work. But as I went along, got better at it, understanding how to get an idea out to the world and cost effectively and all that stuff. And what happened though is something curious. Once I kind of started to realize, I was sort of really liking the marketing aspect and the idea that, you can take an idea and it can end up in 2,000 stores or whatever. And that sort of initial wow, that's exciting, wore off. I started to question some of the things I was helping to put into the world. I'm kind of, I don't know, lack of a better word, I don't have a huge attachment to stuff. Most of my stuff can fit in a small truck, I don't have, I think through the pandemic, I have 2 bikes, but besides that, I don't have a lot of stuff and I don't keep it. And when I lose interest in it, I sell it or whatever. So I like experiences. Experiences are very cool for me. So here's a company that we're launching products. And I was like, oh, I don't like this. This plastic thing doesn't add value. And it wasn't overnight, but it was just starting to really eat away at me. Like this doesn't feel right. And, I'm getting older, especially when I start to have kids and stuff, you're starting to think, am I making the world better? Like, than I came in. And I think, luckily, Peter, he invented something a bunch of years earlier by accident, and it was a coating product. It was plant-based. It was before sustainability was cool. And I was like, you kind of got bored of it, but I got him excited about it. I said, hey, you built this plant-based thing. It coats things. It displaces a lot of toxic chemicals. It's not perfect, but is a huge step in the right direction. Why don't we take this, improve it, develop some IP, and get it out? And he got excited again about it. And one of the big coincidences is the entrepreneurial reality game show called Dragon's Den, which essentially was before Shark Tank happened in the US. And it has the same host, Kevin O'Leary, Robert Herjavec. They're holding a national competition to find the best sustainable innovation. And, long story short, out of 4,000 companies, we came in first. So we got $100,000, no strings attached. We got millions of dollars worth of free press. And that's how we launched a company.
You said you got $100,000, no strings attached, but I think, don't they buy a part of your company?
In the regular show, they offer equity and stuff. Mm-hmm. So in our show, there was a sponsor that was doing a co-marketing.
That's incredible.
Yeah, so they had money, and so essentially we didn't partner with all the dragons. They all wanted to do something, but we said no. We went our own way. We raised some money and we launched the company ourselves.
So what made you stand out? 1 in 4,000 those are steep numbers, and you're actually standing out in front of 4,000 really dedicated entrepreneurs who are doing amazing things. So what's your secret?
Yeah, well, first of all, Peter is a genius at presentation. So that's one thing that stood out. Another thing that stood out is I think I get the sense you're the same way. I'm an early adopter of things. I like to experiment with things as they can let curiosity drive me. And I'm not afraid to try something when no one else is trying it and be that lonely soul that has their hand up. And, of course, I pick wrong sometimes and, whatever. But I'm willing to accept that because I see the advantages of being early. And so I always tell people, like, if you want to be an expert at something, you could spend 20 years toiling away at it, or you could spend a year and a half on something completely new, running as hard as you can. And, in 2004, that's what I did with LinkedIn. LinkedIn was early. There was initially 12 platforms that were kind of vying for this. And then there were 3 platforms that were really fighting for that space. And I doubled down on 3. And as soon as I knew LinkedIn was going to win, I put everything into it. I was spending so much time into it to a point that I got recognized as an expert. And I got recognized by an expert in which I started to get, speaking gigs. So this is like post my trumpet incident. And I started to speak, and even in all women's groups where they usually find women speakers, they couldn't find women speakers. So they had me come in. So I had this mini virtual monopoly in my, small little area. And every time I do a presentation, whether it was at the Bar Association or the International Marketing Association or whatever it is, I would say, give me all your cards and you can connect to my network and we can stay in touch. And this is before, automated things. No one wants a connection request now, but at that time it was like, wow, give me a connection. I want to be part of your network. Imagine that, right? So I connected with thousands of people. And one of the people I connected with was as an individual named Mitchell Levy. And he has a publishing company now that has, he's published thousands of books now. But at the time, he was on his book 10th or something. And I connected because he was an early adopter too. And we struck up a deal, and I co-wrote a book with Peter called Overcoming Inventoritis. And, he just happened to be friends with Steve Wozniak. So we got that testimonial, Steve Wozniak's a nice guy. We don't know him very well, but he writes a testimonial like we're best friends, like me and Steve Jobs, we're like inventoritis. I'm like, nothing we did contributed anything to their success, but it was such a nice testimonial.
You're very humble. You are an incredibly humble person.
And why I'm telling you this is when we, that we had to solve two problems when you're dealing with a TV show. First of all, credibility, right? So credibility, we had a book with Steve Wozniak's signatures. We gave books to the producers. We attended multiple auditions, so they knew who we were, just to establish relationships. And then also we had this one other problem, which was, coatings, right? When you tell the average person, coatings are like paint. So, that saying, as boring as watching paint dry. Well, watching coatings cure is just as boring. So we had this problem because no matter what, it's a TV show. It has to look good on TV. So we were racking our brain, and it just happens that, at the time, I was reading a book by Martha Stewart, which really laid out her ability to repurpose content. This is before Gary Vee and all that stuff, but she had all these publications. And I'm trying to remember the example. It was something about like blueberry muffin or something. It's like, there's a recipe about blueberry muffin, and then she talks about it at a radio show, and then gets repurposed to an article. And then she was doing that. And I think it just sparked the thought that maybe we can do the coding demonstration as a cooking demo. So we would add, part A, part B on a Teflon pan and mix it up and watch it cure in front of the judges with all the ingredients and, with the plant-based ingredients and all that, and that would strike a chord. And it worked. Like, it was entertaining enough and it happened instantaneously enough that they're like, wow. And I think that's the thing we have to solve for. I think with products as well, we talk about our book, Inventoritis, is, everyone, has an idea that they think it's cool. Everyone has a product they think is cool. And some of them are actually really, really cool. But, in order to cut through the noise, it has to meet a certain standard. And one of the things I tell people all the time, because I try to simplify it for people, is, Serene, have you heard of a 3am test?
No.
Okay, so imagine this. So you have this idea. Serene, you have an idea. It's like a fantastic idea. And you're dying to tell someone. It's 3 a.m. and you just cannot wait any longer. So you run out of your house and, you're like, someone that's a potential prospect. And you go to their house and you bang on their door. And no one's answering because it's 3 a.m. and what are you doing? But you're just so enthusiastic. You just can't wait. And you just, you're just bursting with excitement. You kick the door down. Okay. You kick the door down and you run inside and you run up the stairs and you break into their bedroom and you grab them and you shake them and say, hey, I have this great idea. I have to tell you. And then you go, blah, and you tell them your idea. Okay, this is 3 a.m. Now, one of two things is going to happen. Well, maybe 3 things. Maybe they'll call the police, but let's assume that's out of the equation. So one, they're going to be so excited and say, oh my God, I'm so happy you came over. This is the best idea in the world. I'm not going back to sleep. I'm going to stay up with you. We're going to talk about and plan for the rest of the night. Or they're going to say, you're crazy. I'm going back to sleep. So you really have to think, how good of an idea? Is your idea good enough that they stay up with you? Or have you not thought this through enough to do that? So, just put a bit of a filter on it and say, hey, let's try to sort of look at the various aspects of it to see if it sort of meets that threshold.
To be completely candid, I think as of my current history, it seems like I have ideas are not the weakness in my in my strategy. It's generally the implementation.
Sure. And I think that's one aspect, but there's another aspect, I was talking to someone recently about this as well, is it's the insight, right? It's the insight and the execution. And why I say that is there's ideas, right? And you can take those ideas and, you can get feedback, which, some of it's useful, some of it's not. And if you ask someone, hey, I have a great idea, what do you think? It's like asking someone, how's my cooking, right? Depending on how you ask, you might not get an honest answer, right? So, Rob Fitzpatrick wrote a wonderful book called The Mom Test that kind of lays out this problem and possible ways to solve it. But essentially, it involves you getting actual insight. And insight meaning how you need to understand the problem or the solution way better than the person or the person that you're trying to solve for. And there's many different ideas on how you can do that. But bottom line is, if it's an incremental improvement or innovation, people can say if it's good or not. Like, let's say, your shoes, you invented some shoes or created some shoes, and you're trying to add some colors, or you're trying to add some cushioning to the shoes and stuff like that. People are going to be able to tell you very much if they're going to buy it or not, or you can trial sell it or something like that. But there's just certain things where it's not within people's context, where it's tough to know if it's going to go. And, and I think there's this saying, I think there was, IBM now, it's not known as a very innovative company. But at one time, it was a truly innovative company. And they had this rule where if you go around the company and you told people your idea, if I forgot the number, but maybe 7 out of 10 people didn't think you were crazy, you weren't innovative enough. So that's another idea, right? Where it's like, if you have too many people agreeing with you, it might not change the world. But at the same point, if you're too far off, that's a problem. So it's just a sort of exercise in self-awareness, and just really kind of understanding your biases and surrounding yourself with the right people that have the insight, or you gaining the insight, or paying attention to how correct you are with your assessments.
And how I'm interested as to how your plant-based coding passed the 3 a.m. test, because it's not exactly something that's like immediately strikes me as really exciting. If somebody broke into my house at 3 a.m., my first instinct probably wouldn't be to stay up with them all night and talk about plant-based coding. Absolutely.
And I think the why we decided to start, first of all, we make these mistakes too, loving our ideas too much. So it's a message to myself more than anything. But I think for us at that time, one of the things was the main problem with coatings, or these solutions that go onto infrastructure, is infrastructure industry is very conservative, right? Because there's risk management and stuff. Like, for instance, we coated water and wastewater facilities. If there's a leak, or that there's consequences and stuff like that. So risk adversity. But here, this coating was in the field through trials for, at that point, 20 years. Wow. It lasted. Most coatings, now it's been 30 years and it still lasted, but most coatings, when they invent something new, they run a battery of tests, 100, 200, sometimes 300 tests that simulate the outside environment. But as you can't simulate the real world in a lab. So there's inherently some risk. So our justification was that technical risk was off the table. Now we just have to make sure there was commercial viability. One of the things with coatings is the production of it isn't as labor or capital intensive when you're mixing chemicals. Like, let's say, for instance, Elon's, builds a rocket ship. Well, not everyone can test against that, right? Some things you just have to raise a lot of money or go all in and try. And if you look at certain industries, they're structured that way. Like another one's biotech. You know, a lot of biotech technologies run through government programs or universities because it's just not commercially viable. You just can't take that many kicks at the can. So you see the path of innovation running through these different structures. Now, like for instance, like service-based businesses are so easy, right? Like you go in and you ask the customer, like let's say, you know, Serene, you started a podcast creating business, right? Well, how do you test it? Well, you name your price and you go out and start to sell it, right? If and then you try to package it up so people like it and you have happy customers and whatever. If people don't like it, you can keep tweaking it to do it. It's really easy to ideate in the service side of things. Products are different. So you have to ask yourself, you know, how easy is it to test if people will actually buy it? If the cost is low, those areas of innovation are easier to innovate. Coatings, the costs are relatively low if you're a good chemist, right? Like that's the barrier, right? The chemical knowledge, the technical knowledge is the barrier. But the trials is you can mix and do many variations very quickly for low cost. Sometimes you just have to do longer field tests. So every single industry has unique dynamics around it. So the question is, if you were to create like a diary business, right? You could do low runs, right? You can produce 20 units, right? They may cost more. You might not make any money, but you can see if they sell, right? Or some people create now, you know, digital pages where they take pre-orders, right? So those are easier to do than other things. Like, you know, if you were to create a shipbuilding business, well, you know, it's a little bit tougher, or new design for ships. So you have to find different ways to mitigate that risk, running grants or working with experienced people. So you just really have to understand what that means. In the service industry, it's so easy. You just have to have the humility to ask the questions and to see if people are truly getting what they need out of it.
Now, obviously, you have a lot of experience bringing products to market. I'm curious as to what that entails exactly. I mean, you've kind of gone over a lot of it, but like, do you think you could give me a little rundown on kind of the start?
Sure. I think the general process is this. You know, there's something called the Garbowski ratio, and it relates to how much research you do before you spend money on technical development, product development. Some people will immediately start building, right? And I think, you know, developing software, you know, building products and prototypes, you know, I think where you have to spend your time is the insight, right? What problem is it solving, right? Really pay attention to, right? Try to live their world, right? If you were to experience that. So anytime you can sort of immerse yourself in that experience, then you become more knowledgeable of that and the awareness of that. So this is all happening before you build anything. And the more that you can get knowledgeable on it, and I give you one litmus test. Could you write a book about it, right, on the subject? Because if you can't, maybe you don't quite know enough about it. And if it's really inexpensive to try, then that's the fastest way. But let's say it's expensive to try, right? And there's economies of scale at play and stuff like that. Then you really have to make sure you do everything you can to validate it as cheaply as possible. So if you know people that can build things and prototypes very inexpensively or cobble things together, that's an extremely good person to partner with if you're a good marketing person, right? Which, you know, maybe they don't have a marketing skill. You can do that because, you know, Peter has that ability to prototype in a garage, right? And you can prototype very inexpensively, and then you can get people to try it, experiment, and you can watch it. And you just essentially have to look at what is your skill set? What is the skill set to take a category product to the market? How close, or how, first of all, you know, can you update your skill to bridge some of those skill sets? And then beyond that, how close are you to the most knowledgeable person you have in that category? So like, this isn't a problem before, but before there used to be a problem with very poor websites. And maybe in some industry there is an issue. I think I heard a stat still that 40% of businesses don't have websites or something like that. But let's say when I look at someone's website, in the past, I'm not sure if it's true now, your website was as good as the closest person that you had to you that was willing to talk to you honestly about that area, right? Closest friend. Because I've never run into someone that had a best friend that was a designer that was, that was willing to speak the truth, that had a bad website.
Yeah. Yeah.
There is no way that website is tuned, it's optimized, because that we can't be, they probably had that conversation. We can't be friends if your website looks like that. It's gonna ruin my reputation. So then I start to think of friends that have, accountant friends, right? Well, good, right? Like, I have, family that's a naturopathic, doctor. I get great advice on that. So then you have your situation that you're propped into, and then you have to think more intentionally. Hey, what are the areas of my life? Who's my nearest developer? Who's my nearest lawyer, accountant? And if you see gaps, it may be useful for you to get very, very close to someone, not to ask favors, but just awareness, mutual friendships and give and take, however you want to say it. To do that, because when you're trying to launch a product, especially a physical product, it tests every area of business, right? Sometimes trademark, intellectual property law, product liability, distribution, sales, marketing, right? Operations, like everything, right? Pricing, like specializations, and like even a discipline like marketing, right? Marketing, depending on the people that you talk to, there's some people say there's 50 plus sub-disciplines of marketing, right? So there's no one that's good at marketing. When I say someone's good at marketing, I'll accept it, but if they drill down, I'd say I would really figure out what they're good at. Are they good at analytics? Are they good at copywriting? Are they good at PR? Are they good at pricing, right? Development. What are they good at, right? Because I have never met anyone that is great at more than 2, maybe 3 at the best out of the 50. But most good marketing generalists have friends that cover most of those areas, that they're one email or one phone call away from someone that knows above average in those areas. So, with a lone inventor or a lone developer that knows nothing about business, that's a tall task, right? So if you're going to bet your life savings or your house, you might not want to do that because, we did some rough numbers. Your chances of success defines as being able to recoup more than you've put out in money, not like becoming a millionaire, but being able to recover your costs are probably 1 in 1,000. And if you look at a company that is established, it's about 1 in 4. And if you're 1 in 2, you're world class. So you have to ask yourself, where in the continuum do you land? And how do you mitigate your risk relative to what you're trying to accomplish?
I'm sorry, can you, I didn't quite understand the numbers that you said. So you said 1 in 1,000, 1 in 4, 1 in 2. What are those ratios? Sure.
So if I wasn't patenting something and launching into the marketplace, what is my chances of making more money than I put into it? So not being a millionaire. So let's say that this business costs $1,000. What are my chances of making $1,001, and trying to recoup it? So it's that's about one.
I heard that something like 1 in 10 businesses succeeds past 5 years or something like that. So I didn't think the numbers would be 1 in 1,000.
Yeah. So, but with product development, it's different. Okay. So because you're inventing a new category, with businesses, an accounting firm, well, I mean, it's the same, right? If, for instance, if what's the numbers in real estate, right? So if you become a realtor, how many quit because they can't make it? Well, in the first year, I'm trying to remember the stat. I think it's 8 out of 10.
Yeah.
So 8 fail out of 10, right? So in business, yes, I think in the first 2 years, the weed out rate, depending on how you cut the stats, is I think 90%, depending on how you measure that, right? There's the living dead as well. And then there's also other stats that say, you know, chances of getting from 1 to 7 figures or $1 million is 4%. The chances of getting from 1 million to 10 million are 0.4, right? So, but in product development, the failure rate's high because those aren't formed companies; they're pre-revenue. So you don't even have a chance to do that. So essentially, if there's technical development involved, it's closer to 1 in 1,000. And then if you move up the level, and it's more like 1 in, you know, it's 1 in 10, 1 in 4 for a Fortune 500, that's average, and 1 in 2. Now, I'm not saying if they're making an incremental improvement. An incremental improvement is easy to get feedback against. So those have a very high success rate where you're taking something that someone has done and improving it. It's like, hey, look at the bike. I'm going to make it easier to ride. Or here, the shades. It's something, you know, maybe it doesn't slip off my face, or some incremental improvement where they can anchor against something that's existing, then you can do it. But if you're trying to do some sort of paradigm shift or disrupt the market in some way, those are the numbers you're looking at.
What is it about your business that allowed you to be that 1 in 1,000? Or I'm assuming it was more than 1 in 1,000. I'm assuming you made more than $1 profit on your $1,000 investment. So
yeah, like how did it progress? Why did it work? And what sort of things I learned along the way, right? So I think what was helpful was that, you know, Peter was always very curious, so he was running tests all the time. So we got to run through all these things, and also, I mean, for myself, you know, I was able to launch products so often. So, you know, most people, when they do it once, they do it twice, 3 times maybe, but I was involved in so many of them. I got to learn so much from them, so that my odds of succeeding as a team was higher because, first of all, we worked with the same core group of people. A lot of people that are part of our company are from the beginning, and then which works because the thing is, teamwork is very important, and collective knowledge. And then also, you know, being able to, you know, test things inexpensively. Like Peter's able to test things inexpensively. I'm able to do marketing tests very inexpensively. And then I can also plan marketing projects on long time horizons. So I feel like the best marketing programs are on 5-year time horizons, if that makes sense. I know most people, they're like, sign up for Facebook ads. It's not working. And it's like day 3. Yeah. But I find the best ones if you can do it, or if you can look forward 5 years. And year 1 is kind of working. Year 2 is sort of working. Year 3, it comes out of nowhere. And year 4 is just amazing. And why I say that is you just build some fundamentals into it. You have a vision of how it needs to be and who you need to involve. So I think that's what I probably learned the most over the years is if someone has a lot of experience in an area, they can see things out multi-steps, maybe like 20 steps in some instances. Not to say that it's going to go exactly to those 20 steps, because if you look at chess players, you know, they can see 2 to 3.5 moves ahead, or sorry, 2 to 2.5 moves ahead, maybe 3, because, you know, the sort of the variables get huge. But if you can kind of map out where it's going to go, you can adjust quicker than most people. So whenever I try to do something, I try to work with someone that has experience that could map something out over multiple years, because then you don't have those false starts. Like, let's say you go on a tech platform and, you know, a year from now, it's no good. I would love to talk to someone and say, hey, what does it need to look like over the next 3 to 5 years? And where do I start? And where, how does it progress? Whenever possible, I try to have those conversations because I think it gives us an advantage. I think too often we'll get a newsletter in our mail and it's like, that's the silver bullet, right? And maybe tactically it could work on the platform of your strategy, but that's just one tactic that adds to it. But the fundamental of your strategy, your philosophy on how you approach your market and stuff like that, I think that's what creates long-term competitive advantage. When you're really, really consistent with your thought on something and you can maintain that consistency for a long period of time, and then you can build trust. Easier said than done when you have multiple interests. So you might need to compartmentalize, but I think if you can find a way where you can work with people to do that. And one of the things I learned late in my career is understanding how to approach team building. And maybe my quote unquote excuse is introvert, this and that. I played individual sports, but I mean, understanding who you collaborate well with, like, that when you're with them, your output gets 3 times, 5 times, 10 times, right? And just really, really pay attention to what dynamic, situation that occurs, and then trying to put yourself in that situation more often. And then also looking at, when are you most productive? When do you get the best ideas? Darwin used to have this thing where he used to take walks twice a day. And he'd walk in the morning, he'd walk in the afternoon, and he was extremely intentional with it to a point where he created a walking path in his backyard, and he would walk there, and that's where we get the bulk of his ideas. And I think if you look at all the papers that he published over the years, he was very productive in that. So in sports is very, very common because I come from the sports side, and sports psychology or behavior psychology is extremely interesting to me. So I'm constantly thinking about ideal performance state. So that's talked about very much in athletics, right? They do visualization, right? So like, focus on hitting the perfect serve, or, using positive wording, or there's all sorts of theories around, what you should eat in the morning and what time you should sleep. But here we are doing other things that, that require performance. And, we grab a cup of coffee and run out the door for some, right? So and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But if you have a goal that is much bigger, it may make sense to like you said, your retreat, where self-awareness, right? It's like, hey, when do I get that idea? Is it when I wake up? Is it at night? Am I running? Am I in the shower? Am I driving? And then just optimize for that, right? Is it riding a bike? Then I'm like, I guess you're riding a bike 5 days a week now. You're riding it twice a week. You can ride it 5 days a week. And then maybe that'll help you. Maybe it won't, but you can test against that.
Yeah, that's brilliant. You've given me some ideas because I have a habit of journaling twice a day, and most days. And now I've just thought, when I'm writing the idea that I came up with today in the journal, now I will just record the time that I came up with it and kind of at what time of day I felt what way. But it's interesting that you said that, because I think of it like exercise oftentimes, I don't think this is an understatement, it improves my mental performance and like my emotional capabilities, or it just improves my emotional state by like, I would say 20%, right? And so not exercising, just that, like is detrimental to me by 20%. And then if I eat the wrong food, I get sleepy, and so it's just all these little things during the day. If I don't sleep enough, if I sleep 6 hours a day instead of 8, I don't concentrate as well. I'm kind of all over the map. So it's like actually just these little like 10% increments, and even like 5% incremental improvements add up to sometimes over 100% better than baseline. And so
that's awesome. I love it. Yeah, I know you mentioned something really, really interesting there, because I love simplicity. Because I think sometimes, when you have all these optimization points, then you get too constricted. If you are, some people love it and it helps them, and some people hate it. And I'm always trying to think of, and I heard this maybe from Dan Sullivan, I guess. What is the one thing you can do to solve 100 problems? Like, what's the upstream thing? And one of the goals I had was to run a marathon. And as a tennis player, marathon is the furthest thing from what an average tennis player wants to do. Because what does a tennis player do? They run from one side of the court to the other, which is really short, and then you're picking up balls in between. You're resting all the time. You're sitting on chairs. So maybe I can't speak for all tennis players. For me, I was just like, I wanted to do it. And one of the things I really focus on, just one thing, like I went in a training and all those things, but it's just the amount of sleep I got. Mm-hmm. So my background, original education was in human kinetics or kinesiology. So I always noticed, like, because I ran international conferences and stuff just before I did the entrepreneurial thing. And so here's the pattern behavior. Okay. So January comes, right? December comes, right? Christmas, we ate too much. January comes, resolutions happen, and everyone's good, right? They start exercising, they go to the gym, they ride bikes, and for the first 3 weeks, it's awesome. And then they fall off, and then okay, again, April, May, summer's coming up in most places in the world. So, you got to start looking good. So you attend the gym again, you have to fit into whatever bathing suit or whatever you want to do outdoorsy, and you want to feel better. So gym membership spikes at that time, right? So just looking at it from a gym perspective. And then people go outdoors, and then gym memberships go down, right? So people do what they do. And then what happens is in October, it spikes again. And it has a lot to do with schooling cycles and different things, but it spikes briefly, and then it goes down again. And then the trend continues again in December and off to January. And so the question is, okay, that first 3 weeks, why do people drop off? Well, here's what happens. You get super excited. You go to the gym and you exercise maybe 20 minutes 3 times a week or whatever. So, and then you're busy and you keep everything else the same. Except what happens is when you exercise more than you're used to, you are taxing your body, which is you're withdrawing energy, right? But you're still sleeping the same amount. Mm-hmm. So picture a bank account, right? You make a deposit. When you go to sleep, you make a deposit, right? When you're in your day, you make a withdrawal. So now your deposit and your withdrawals are not matching up, because you're withdrawing way more, but you're depositing the same way. So if you add 20 minutes of exercise, I don't know, this is a simple math, 20 minutes more sleep, right? Mm-hmm. And it's a simple concept, but it'll help you get through it. Another opportunity, a strategy that some people use is start progressively. So, let's go 2 minutes a day of extra exercise. Do it for a week, do it for 5 minutes, do it for 10 minutes. Then your body adapts.
All you need, like one push-up a day is, yeah.
One push-up a day, and then you just go really, really conservative. So your body adapts. So your withdrawals are not big, and your body adapts. So you're not as tired. So that's another way of going through it. But I think looking at things from a, systems perspective, Donna Meadows has a book called Thinking in Systems. Is very useful to see, are you serving yourself well in terms of what you're trying to do?
I love that. It's interesting. There's a guy called Kim Barta, Barta, and he's a therapist, and he has this course online. I don't actually think it's accessible right now. He needs to get his shit together because it's amazing. But it's a shadow course, and he helps a lot of people who have like serious drug addiction, and also he deals with like some of the worst cases. And he has this amazing graph that will stick with me. And it's like, what happens when, so when he's dealing with drug addicts, so he has this graph, and it's like, there's the health cycle. And so to get healthy, it sucks at first. And so like your overall level of enjoyment goes down. And then maybe you feel, better kind of afterwards. But over time, even though you're going down a lot because it really sucks to run every day, over time, that graph goes up. And so even eventually, even when you have to run and it sucks to run, you're still feeling better at your lowest than you were when you were at your baseline when you started.
Got it.
And this is a visual podcast, you'll have to watch this. But when you do drugs, right, it starts really high. You get an amazing high, but then the hangover the next day, you feel terrible. But it's easy to keep pursuing that high. But over time, 3 months down the road, 6 months down the road, a year, your baseline is going down. So you hear, crazy drug addict, not crazy, but you hear drug addicts talk about how like when they get high now, it's just to get back to baseline, just to be normal again. And actually, eventually, they're not even feeling normal. They're still feeling terrible. Yeah. And so the thing he would do with drug addicts is he wouldn't tell them to stop doing drugs. He wouldn't, you can't tell someone what to do. And this is like their medicine, right? They need it. So he's not telling them what to do, but he introduces healthy habits to them. And so they start exercising, they start like understanding their emotions and communicating better. And all of a sudden they're healthy. They're getting healthy. And over 6 months, over a year, it takes a long time. Yeah. They're suddenly feeling amazing, and they decide to quit their drug by themselves. Yeah. And then he says eventually, 6 months down the road, they'll say, I'm going to try this drug again. But what happens is that they're so healthy that even the high is not as good as the low of being healthy. So when they get high, they still feel like shit because they're kind of stuck in that negative downtrend. And so they just quit by themselves. That's kind of his story, and I'm sure it's different for everyone. But I think a lot of becoming healthy is just learning to mitigate those initial giant drops in happiness.
Yeah, no, it's cool. I have a great deal of respect for people that tackle those very, very big challenges, right? I mean, hierarchy of need, right? If you're kind of sort of doing the personal development on the upper end of things where you're just trying to like maximize your potential, that's one thing. But if you're trying to work through some serious stuff on the sort of the more basic needs as humans, that's where I admire people that spend their time there solving problems, because that's they really know what they're doing.
And I think I gave the example of drugs, but I think even a lot of high functioning entrepreneurs oftentimes have their own vices that are kind of similar. Even I don't know, whether it be like sugar, like junk food, or I don't know, whatever it may be. But yeah, it is, when you're in optimization land, I guess it's just different challenges. And I think it just comes back to understanding yourself, right? Like, when are you more likely to have willpower or discipline? Like, some people do the hardest task in the morning, or some people are very good at saying, hey, I will do this and then reward myself, right? And everyone has different ways to think about it, and just paying attention to what your temperament is, right? Or I'm like in a great mood when I'm around this person, or I collaborate really good in this situation, right? Or I'm a night owl, right? And that's where I should optimize against. I think it just really comes down to how well do you know yourself? How do you quiet your mind and your body enough to pay attention to the things that are affecting you? Have you heard of a author named Gay Hendricks? Have you heard of him? He's got a book called The Big Leap.
and he has it's concept called, I think it's called the upper limit problem, I think. So, and I think you talked about baseline highs and stuff, but he said that even for people that have achieved great things, and one of his clients was Michael Dell of Dell Computers, we will only allow ourselves to be so happy. So when we exceed our maximum happiness threshold, we will find ways to do, in small ways or sometimes big ways, sabotage our happiness. And it's funny because I noticed that, right? Where, if something goes well, doesn't mean something bad will happen right after. Or if 5 things go well, there's no rule that says that something bad is going to happen, but you just when sometimes you get that lingering feeling that maybe things are going well, and maybe I missed something or whatever. It's like his theory is that there's just no reason to feel that way, right? Unless there's facts to go along with it. Maybe there's gut feelings, but you can, don't let that stop you from doing the next good thing. And he talks about that a lot. And I thought that's really interesting, because sometimes when I have a really good day or really good week, I'll worry about something random for no reason. And I think that's what he's talking about. And it's a really interesting thought that we all have a baseline ceiling of happiness.
That's fascinating, because I do notice actually that when I succeed, so and I'm changing this and I'm very aware of it, but like kind of up until now, oftentimes when I succeed, it's not so much a joy. Maybe there's like a little dopamine rush, but it's not so much happiness as it is alleviation of fear or guilt or something like that. And so it's the hedonic treadmill, I guess. I'm like constantly looking for the next thing, and there's no real appreciation of what I've gotten so far. And
yeah,
I've noticed in the past that when I look back on my life, it's like, oh, I have no achievements. That's kind of my baseline thought, because maybe there's no chemical process in my body that I'm willingly creating that is, oh, I've achieved this, I should feel proud or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, the classic thing with entrepreneurs celebration, right, is really tough when it's like, oh, there's the next thing, or here's something someone else is doing or something. Well, I'm not saying that's what is in your situation, but yeah, different things.
That's what it is. Yeah. I think
so. So I know what you're talking about. So I say entrepreneurship is a social exercise, and I'll explain. Okay, so when you start out, not many people know what you're doing. You're getting going. It's private, right? Your successes and failures are private. As you become, let's say you get more known, you get more success, your failures become more visible, right? And as you hire more staff, there's always ups and downs. Ever so much, your failure becomes more and more visible. And as an introvert, that's scary, right? Yeah. For me, it's scary. For other people, maybe not. I can't speak to everyone, but so I view it as this: if you put a 2x4 on the ground and you walk across it, it's pretty easy, right? Anyone can walk across the 2x4 and sitting on the ground. So each time your company grows bigger, or the stakes go up, or the dollars go up, picture that 2x4 going a little higher in the air. Okay. And then, so it's like, all right, well, first of all, 5 people know what you're doing. 100 people know what you're doing. 1,000 people see your ups and downs. 10,000 people, 100,000 people. And then, you have those people where, they're making big plays and everyone's a critic, and there's, literally billions of people paying attention. So it's like, that 2x4 is 10,000 feet in the air. And the thing that you have to do is the same, which is take one step after the other, which any human being can do. But can you do it under pressure? Like in tennis, if no one's watching, can you get a serve in? Okay. there's 100,000 people watching. There's the million people watching. There's $1 million on the line, right? How does that feel? And can you still perform? And, it's just, how do you become more comfortable with that feeling? Or how do you put your cause above that so that you can somehow see past that and sort of not focus on that? So I think that's a task. And if I were to go into a sport example, let's say golf, on the 17th or 18th hole, that's when a lot of people choke, right? They start to not focus on what they need to do. And they focus about, instead of winning, they focus about not losing. And then they start playing really rigid, and whatever got them there, they're not doing, and everything just it falls out of whack, right? So I had a coach for golf, because at one point, I wanted to get a little bit better at it. And he was world class, and he was like a lower level pro, but he was extremely world class, won a lot of pro events locally. And then what he would get is, students to do was practice the victory speech. And, on the surface, it's like, that's a little conceited, humility here. But I think what he wanted people to get comfortable with is, some people are extremely shy and they don't want to brag and stuff. And they're not good at talking in front of people or being the center of attention. So guess what? When you win a tournament, you become the center of attention. So that becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, where you have it in your back of your mind, you're worried about winning, and that speech you have to give. So he makes his players that, do that speech. So you're prepared to thank people and to do those things. So not get in your head. So for some people, giving the acceptance speech for an award, or a lifetime acceptance award for humanitarian, or whatever it is, those are some of the ideas on just kind of visualize yourself at the end, feeling extremely comfortable with people as eyes on you. Could be something you could take from the sports world and apply it to, social causes or the entrepreneurial world.
That is mind blowing. Wow. First, I mean, you have spoken directly to me here, because I have been struggling with this with my podcast. Like, it's so small, but yet as it grows, I'm getting more and more nervous. And it's like, I think it's also projection into the future of, like, I'm aiming to get more and more subscribers and more people watching. And there's this part of me that, like, I love talking to people one-on-one. It's my favorite thing to do. But the idea of other people listening, and other people, like, I've already gotten criticism and all that stuff. And it's exactly that. I'm walking on it's like, I'm imagining walking on a 2x4 over to like,
gets higher and higher
over some skyscrapers, and and the thing you said about the victory speech was interesting, because I'm a big fan of, like, manifestation, and maybe not. I'm not going to comment on whether there's, like, magical properties and whether you can win the lottery with it. That's not really my interest. It's my interest is more in like programming my mind to already be grateful to have won, or already be grateful to have achieved victory. Because if somebody is, like you said, is concentrating on losing, don't lose, that's putting in your mind the thought of losing, and then your mind is, like, ready to lose. That's, it's like, don't think of a purple elephant. And so not only are they alleviating that fear of loss, but I think they're also getting ready they're telling their mind that winning is inevitable as well, which I think is really important.
Yeah. So one of the ways to work on this, because as your podcast gets bigger, obviously you have a skill for this, is, get crystal clear on your core values, and get crystal clear on your vision. So don't worry about the number of people, get really crystal clear on that. And then find people in your network or, emerging that share that vision, and then bring them in to the podcast to help you achieve that vision.
You mean bring them in, like, not as guests? Do you mean
co-producer, partner, I don't know, near you to help you do that, so you can focus on the piece that you love, and they can deal with the other piece that you don't like, and then you can just focus on just having one-on-one conversations. And then build to something bigger that you both believe in. Because I one of the things I don't like is looking at my interviews. Like, I've done 270 episodes. I don't like reviewing and watching myself speak on video, but I have people that watch me and say, if I really suck or I need to improve, please tell me, right? Right? Or stuff like that. So I'm luckily around people that sort of help me in different areas where, I'm mitigated, but I'm not world-class, but they're world-class at, right? So, but the parts that I need to be world-class at, I'll focus on and I'll do it, but I can't tackle, 5 things at once. I can get average at it, I can accept it, but there's people out there that love the stuff that you don't love about what you're trying to do. So the only way that you'll attract those people into your life is you need to be crystal clear on what your core values are and what the end game is. Let's say you never showed that, big, goal that you have, write it down, and then show it to people, because you have to, and they start sharing it to people, and you'll find, you'll have supporters, maybe not initially, but then you'll have people that are like, hey, encouraging you, promoting you, sort of making sure that you don't shy away from the next challenge in terms of your own vision and where you want to go as well. So I'm simplifying it, but that's the theory.
It's a very good point. And now that you mention it, like, I do have friends, not who would work on it full time or anything like that, but I do have a few friends who would for sure help me out. Like, my friend Flo, who was on the podcast earlier on, is an SEO person. And I was like, oh, why don't I just have a call with her about doing SEO for my podcast? Like, I can for sure
promote her, right? Like, promote her every show, right?
And incredible. Go use her services. She just made, actually recently, I don't think I'm supposed to, maybe I won't say, but she's a very successful business person, and it's because of her SEO, and you should check her out. Anyway, Flo Wang.
Which is awesome, right? She's got some secret sauce, which SEO is important. So, but yeah, so you have someone that you get along with, that you could probably plug every episode, or they can do SEO, or they could write articles that you can promote through your social. There's some sort of partnership that, even at a very light level, that you can do and help each other out. And then you don't have to count on yourself. And I think that's one of the things I did, is like, just because I could figure it out, I thought I had to do it. But it's one thing about learning it so that you can get help, and it's another thing to learn it so you feel like you have to do all of it yourself. And I just really figured out, how do I work with people to make that win-win greater than if we weren't working together? And I'm starting to really understand the type of people that that I need to have around for that to occur consistently. And it's just trial and error. You don't know, but just really pay attention to when you have certain people, like your friend. Did you say Flo?
Yeah, Flo Wang.
Yeah. So when you have Flo, then you're like, hey, you say, Flo, hey, I want you, with what I'm doing, how do we work together? Right? This is the piece I love. How do I make it work for you? And how do we collaborate? And just start having that conversation. And then just have that conversation every week. And I'm sure if you guys are good friends, you'll find a way somehow to make it work.
That's brilliant. Wow. Yeah, there is this piece of like, I'm not a huge fan of editing, but I think actually watching myself, although it's not my favorite thing to do, has been really beneficial because I've just been able to track like, oh, I'm not doing this quite right. I should do better introductions or something like that. And but eventually, for sure, I think outsourcing is going to be the move because there's so much.
Outsourcing is one thing. I'm talking about partnering, right? Is that you basically, figure out what a shared vision could look like. I think outsourcing is easy. You can do it anytime as long as there's some revenue engine attached to your what you're doing. But what I'm talking about is more of a partnership where you're elevating her, she's elevating you, and what you're doing kind of ties together with what she's trying to accomplish, if you could make that happen in a small way.
And you in a partnership, it's a different dynamic because you both have a real investment in the product. With outsourcing, it's kind of just maybe you're paying someone and they're doing what maybe the bare minimum, like who knows what
bare minimum or what you ask them to do, right? Which is a fine, but it's just, I'm not saying that, this partnership or strategic alliances are complicated matters. So I'm not saying this is what you do with this person for sure, but I think the concept is this: if you want, this is totally up to you. If you can find ways to bring in people into your community where there's a shared vision, where each people get something out of it in terms of elevating their goals. Like you first of all, you have to understand what their goals are, and if you can align your goals to their goals, you can really help each other. I mean, there's all sorts of formal things you can do with contracts and stuff like that, but at the core, that's how it starts, where you're just kind of finding the possible fits. You can formalize things going forward, but I think just collaborating is where it starts, right?
That's fantastic. And that's for people without a revenue engine attached to their startup, I think oftentimes there's this very limited belief, which is, somewhat true, but it's like, I don't have the money to do X. And so I have to do it all by myself because, but that's a really fantastic just strategy for growth.
Sure. I mean, I think back in the day, one of the fun hacks, which is super common now, was, you write an ebook where everyone's contributing into it and everyone promotes it, right? That's kind of played out right now, but there's different ideas you can have around that where you create community and co-ownership and, aligned interests, right? So you just have to figure out and just be curious about what other people are doing and try things, I think, is the only way you figure out what works for you.
Actually, Elliot, my partner, just got published in one of those books. It's called Encounters with the Melbourne Circle. And it was just a few pages of a chapter about advice.
Yeah. And it's useful, right? For, obviously he sees value of it and everyone's promoting it. And, he wrote an article and he became an author. Yeah.
And that's true. There's like 20 people promoting it as well. Like who have a real dedicated interest, a vested interest together out there.
Yeah. So like, for instance, in a small way, you could have partners, friends of the show, and you can put the links on their site, right? That's like a really small partnership. You can have, friends of the show, occasionally guesting on the show. I mean, you just pay attention to what other people do in terms of partnerships, right? If you have a sponsor, the sponsor could come on board and talk or contribute an article to your website, right? Or one of your friends of your show could contribute an article or something, right? So other things, right? That just make it not just you, make it aligned with other people.
The thought is still lingering with me because you talked about at the beginning how one of your biggest, I guess, weak points was operations. So managing the happiness of your staff, and I guess the day-to-day culture of the company. And so how did you tackle that? How did you improve that?
Oh, wow. Okay. So, I'm trying to figure out, you have 50 minutes, how I should start this. I think for me, I realized one of the things when you're an entrepreneur, you let your health go, and I let my health go, and I did a lot of effort to get my health back to where it needed to be, and part of that process of overcoming that, call it limiting belief, that I decided that I could probably, if I could tackle this, I could tackle anything. So the first thing I did is I took a beginner's mind approach and rethought how I understood marketing. So I basically threw everything I knew out the door, and I relearned marketing from, I started direct response and worked outwards. But from there, I gained some confidence. I said, hey, maybe I can learn operations at the next level. So I learned a lot through coaching, and also one of the things that was most helpful was a book called EOS. I think you may have heard mentioned, Entrepreneurial Operating System. So they have a wonderful framework in which you organize a very lightweight approach to managing a company. So that was very, very much key. But from there, really understanding, I think I talked about before, different people and their potential, right? So, who are they? What are their interests? What are their strengths? Build the trust. What are their fears? And what can I do to help them? Whether I help them directly, or whether to find other ways to help them by introducing them to people, resources and stuff like that. And we tried to double down on that and help people. And then just kind of consistently doing that. But we mentioned before, getting really, really clear on core values, right? I mean, we have a grow or die. We have, simplicity. We have, do the right thing. And then we have customer focus, but we have some very clear language around that. And it's reinforcing that on a day-to-day. But what really helped me was I took the company focus, and then I really, really understood what was important to me, and making sure that the company alignment and the personal alignment was good. Because if you're not happy and you're not believing what you tell people, people are smart. They know if you're shoveling them just something that sounds good that you read in a book. Do you believe it? Do you act on it? And every time you act on it consistently, you build trust. And, every day you're earning that trust of your people. So, reverse pyramid, right? It's not a hierarchy. I'm just kind of like, what can I do to support people? And how can I do my best to maintain that when the number of people grows? And I think that's been my biggest challenge, is as the number of people grow, I just don't have as much direct access to people. And I have to find other creative ways to be able to communicate our culture and what's important. And I think it's easier with a smaller group, but it just comes down to, what do you do on a daily basis to be the best example for people you can be?
Wow. I like that about honesty.
When you mess up and that you're not perfect, because that's frustrating as well, right? When you try so hard to be perfect, and it's bad on the team, because I think people get very conservative and self-conscious when they think things have to be so perfect, right? If you curate your image and your communication, first of all, you don't have as much trust. And secondly, for some, they just feel like they can't make a mistake, which is a bad environment. So I know people talk about imposter syndrome and other things. Is one of the ways to get through that is just admit your mistakes. Yeah. And I've made a ton of them, and I'll continue. I'll try not to repeat. Occasionally I repeat, but I try not to repeat them.
That's so important, especially because there's this very simple lesson that I learned the other day about creating a good culture. Because if I set up a culture where everything has to be perfect, then people around me, I might project onto them that they are like me, where they might just say something and spit it out and be honest and be a little bit too candid. But oftentimes some people, for instance, have a really hard time telling the truth because maybe as a child they were punished for telling the truth or whatever. And so a big part for me, I've learned has been to create a container where people feel comfortable enough to come up to me and tell me things. And I need to create a lot more safety than I would need because everyone has their own different needs and experiences.
Oh yeah. You have to tell people many times and demonstrate so they believe that you mean that, right? Because, you've always, seen that example where someone says, hey, tell me what you really think. And you tell them what you really think and they do not like it, right? So I think there's a really good book called, I think it's called Thanks for the Feedback. And what were the three things that people look for? They're looking for, I guess, hurrah, I agree. They're looking for coaching and they're looking for critique. I forgot what the three were, but basically you have to try to identify what people are looking for, right? Because not people are always looking for a critique or coaching, right? So I think, I try to be careful with that when that I read that correctly. Then try to get them, know them well so that you understand what they're truly looking for, because it's not necessarily critique all the time.
Especially I've noticed with younger, or not younger, but newer artists, like when they're showing you something that maybe isn't finished yet, or like it's very, I never critique because like when something's so fresh and it's like a baby, you can't critique it. You just, coaching and hurrah all the way, like, okay. Would you like to help wrap it up by kindly giving some advice to perhaps new entrepreneurs who are hoping to enter into the space, or new product launchers, whatever you prefer?
Sure. I think for me, entrepreneurship is really, really tough. So I would say when I first started entrepreneurship, it wasn't very much glorified. It is now. So I've heard stats from different people, but one of the ones that makes sense to me, at least sort of feel wise, is 7% of the people in the world should be entrepreneurs. And I believe something along those lines, which means that 93% of people would be happier in a job. And I hate the idea of entrepreneurship being glorified as a goal of success, because it's not, because you lose money and all these things happen. And there's that running joke where when you become let's say you don't like your boss, right? That's not the reason to start an entrepreneurial journey, because essentially when you become an entrepreneur, you still have a boss, which is your client. It could be your shareholders, and you work twice as hard, and you probably make less than half or nothing, right? So give it some thought. And why I can say that without feeling like I discourage a potential entrepreneur is, you can't discourage a real entrepreneur. You just cannot. You can spot them a mile away, and they have the temperament, and they're very, very resilient. And if you poo-poo on their idea, they'll come back and they'll stay with it. But there are people that maybe it's not quite their temperament, and I sometimes see it, and I sometimes wonder that maybe they would be a lot happier when they could shut it off at a certain time, and maybe they're playing into the hype around using entrepreneurship as a measurement for success. So to each their own, but my hope is just that people are in it for the right reasons. If they have a cause, if they have a burning desire inside to create and to do things, and to also not let other people define what that success is. I feel so happy for people that have small or medium-sized lifestyle businesses that absolutely follows no rules in any book. I love it. It's fantastic, because I find those are happy. So don't read a book and put yourself in a box that if you don't need to make it big, and you can design a life around it. I find those are the funnest things to be a part of.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much. That was a great message. To summarize, don't become an entrepreneur.
You don't need to be an entrepreneur to be happy. I don't regret it at all. It's, even when I was struggling the absolute most, I didn't think about quitting because I just couldn't visualize myself doing anything else. And if you have that in you, then surround yourself with good people and just approach everything is a learning opportunity. No failures as a learning opportunity. And, surround yourself with people that tell you the truth.
Very important. Okay. Tats, thank you so much for coming on. This was an incredible podcast. I hope to speak to you again soon.
All right. Thank you, Serene.
Have a good day.